Alright, so now we are in our AWS Management Console, and from here we will start our journey to create an RDS instance from scratch, and we will go through various options that RDS can have and what are the best practices while configuring that RDS instance, right? So without further ado, let's start. I'm in AWS Management Console right now. So what we will do, we will go to RDS service. So search the RDS service from the filter box, and let's go to the RDS dashboard, right? Very shortly, we will be redirected to RDS dashboard. There are lots of options we can go through. Now let's create a database instance first. So click on database on the left and then click on create database, right? So there are so many options you can have. You can have RDS instance for MySQL, for PostgreSQL, Oracle, SQL Server. So there are so many engines supported by RDS, but in this course, we will just focus on having MySQL on RDS. So we will go with this option, right? So we'll choose MySQL, and then we'll go a little bit down. There are so many options. I might not go with all the options. I will just go through the basic one and what are the best practices we should think of. The first thing first, whenever you create the instance for the first time, you have to choose what engine type you're gonna have, right? So I'm choosing the default one, but if you want, depending on your requirements, you can choose the version that your application needs, right? So I will just go with the MySQL 8.0.35. All right, and then you have to choose a template. All right, so because it's a course and this is not something that we're doing for production, so we will just choose the dev test one, right? If you want to deploy the RDS instance for your production grade application, then definitely you will go with the production options. And if you choose production options, you will have lots of extra configurations that you can have, right? For example, enabling high availability or multi-AZ kind of thing, right? So, but to minimize the cost, we will just choose the dev test version of the engine, right? And as soon as I choose dev test options, the availability and durability will be selected as single DB instance, right? So it's a test thing. So we are not going to have our instance to be deployed in multiple availability zones. We are okay with just one availability zones, right? So that it will be selected by default single DB instance, and it will also minimize the cost. The second thing is give a name to your database instance, right? For example, we are creating the RDS instance for our WordPress application. So let's give a name called WordPress. All right, and then give a username and passwords that you will use whenever you try to connect your RDS from your MySQL client, right? So I'm okay with the default username, which can be admin, or let's say I can change it to something else. Let's say the username is my name, Asif Ahmed, right? And then another good practice is specifically for production or any type of RDS instance, you should not directly store your RDS passwords here. What you can do, you can integrate your RDS instance with AWS Secret Manager. So basically in AWS Secret Manager, you will create a secret with the credentials, and from here you can link that secret manager, and that way it will be more secure rather than typing the passwords here, right? But for making it simple, so let's type the passwords here. Let's give a random password, right? Make sure the passwords are unique in both cases. So let's try it again if I get it right. I think that's okay. All right. The next thing is you have to choose how big your RDS instance will be, right? And because this is a demo lab, so we are not going for a big instance. rather than let's go for a small instance. Let's say T2 micro. So you have to choose, I think you have to choose the burstable classes as well if you want the small instance. So choose burstable classes and then choose one of the instance, because it's a very small instance. So I want to go with T3 medium, right? So choose your instance very wisely. The other thing is, for every RDS instance you need to have a storage allocated, so you can allocate how much storage you want for your RDS instance. The bigger it will be, the more cost will be involved. So this is because it's a testing, so I might not go with 200 GB, so let's make it just 20 GB, right? And there's some advanced settings as well. There's something called storage auto scaling. So what is that? So basically storage auto scaling is, if you are run out of space in your RDS, what will happen, the storage will be automatically scaled up to, let's say, 1000 GB, or maybe up to 50 GB, let's up to 100 GB. So that means if my initial storage allocation, which was 20 GB, is out of space, then what RDS will do, it will automatically auto scale to 100 GB, right? So for product, this is might not be needed for dev environment, but for production grade applications, that might be a good option that you can go with. All right, the next thing is how we want to connect our MySQL client to RDS. There are two ways. What we can do, we can connect to RDS from an EC2 instance. So if that is the case, you can choose this one. But in our case, we are not trying to connect from any EC2 instance. So we'll just disable that options. And the other thing is, you have to deploy your RDS in one of the network, one of the virtual private cloud. So choose your network where you want to deploy your applications, right? So let's say I choose this one, and then choose the subnet group as well. So what is subnet group? So basically in RDS, you have to create a subnet group first, and that subnet group will enlist which subnets your RDS will be deployed to. So if you click on the left side, and if you go to somewhere in subnet group, you can create a subnet group with associated subnets. And whenever you try to deploy your RDS into one of these subnet group, your RDS will be deployed to one of the subnets, right? That's it. And the other thing is, for production grade application, you should not make your RDS instance publicly accessible. But for our case, because we are trying to access our RDS instance from MySQL client, so we need it to be public, right? So choose the public access as yes. But as I said, for production grade application, you should always close that public connection unless it is really necessary, right? The next very important thing, whenever we try to connect to RDS instance from MySQL client, which port the client will connect to, so we need to keep those ports open, and that can be done with the help of security group. So in the security group, I can define what port will be open for public user so that they can connect to the RDS instance, right? So let's create a new VPC security group. So let's give a name to this group. Let's say test security group, right? Now we also have something called RDS proxy. So what is RDS proxy? Basically, if you enable RDS proxy, it will help your application to be improved in terms of scalability, resilience, and security, right? So with RDS proxy, you can share connections with different applications, right? So it will improve the performance of your application as well, right? And there's so many other things as well, and how we want our RDS to be connected. So in this case, we want password authentication. That means whenever my MySQL client will try to connect to this RDS instance, we need password authentication, but there are some other options as well, right? And there's some other options for monitoring as well. For example, um, you can turn on performance insights, and what will happen, so your RDS will monitor the performance of your instance, right? And if something goes wrong, you can go to performance insights and see what wrong is happening, right? And those insights can be stored for certain days. The longer you store the insights, the more cost. So you can go from 7 days until 2 years, right? So if you do not want them to be stored for long run, so maybe you can choose 7 days. So after 7 days, it will just retain 7 days of insights, right? And also you can make sure those insights are encrypted with some sort of KMS key, right? And there's so many other things you can configure. But long story short, there are a few important concepts or thoughts that you should think of. First of all, if it's a production grade application, make sure your application is your RDS is deployed into multiple AZ, and also make sure your instance are encrypted with some sort of KMS keys. And other thing I have said, if it's production grade application, in most of the case, the public access will be disabled, so it will be only accessible from some AWS network. It should not be publicly accessible, right? And that's pretty all. If I go to additional configurations, right? So there's so many other things. There's something called backup retention period. So what happens, you can, if you enable, so by default, automated backups are enabled. So if you enable automated backup, what will happen? Every day, RDS will take a backup of your current RDS instance, and those backups will be retained for 7 days. If you want them to be retained for long run, so you can choose how many days you want this backup to be stored. And after 35 days, let's say the maximum it can be stored for 35 days, and after 35 days those backups will be removed, right? So one thing to be noted here as well, if you delete the RDS instance, those automated backup will be removed as well, right? So there is no automated backup will remain if you delete the instance. So what option you can do, apart from having automated backup, there is something called manual snapshot as well. So you can take, maybe you can write a script, and that script will take a manual backup of your RDS maybe every 4 hours, right? And that way, even if your RDS instance are deleted, those backups will remain. So long story short, automated backup will be deleted once you delete the RDS instance, whereas manual snapshots will be kept even if the RDS instances are deleted, right? And also how long you want to retain them, it will have direct link with the cost, right? And also you can choose the backup window as well. Like for example, if the peak hour is, let's say, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and definitely you do not want the backup to happen during peak hour, so you can choose the backup window as well. So let's say the backup will start maybe, let's say, at 8 p.m., right? And it will run for, let's say, maximum 2 hours, right? And you can define the backup window in that way as well, right? So there's so many things you can do. And also at the end, you can see the estimated monthly cost for your RDS instance. And that's all. Now what we will do, we will create the database. And to do that, just simply click on this orange create database button, and voila, it seems it's working, right? So let's close this window, by the way. So I have just created a database instance for myself, as you can see. But the thing is, database creation process is a lengthy thing. It will take roughly 10 to 20 minutes to be created. So let's for roughly 10 to 20 minutes, and once the status of the database instance become available, we'll come back to and we'll start our next thing. All right, so let's wait for a few minutes.